Well, welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. It's time now for the week that was. Let's take at the top stories that made headlines across the globe this week. And we will start here in Nigeria, where there are 39 cases of Mpox. That is according to the Center for Disease Control. It comes after the World Health Organization declared the outbreak a global emergency for the second time in 2 years. Over a dozen African countries have confirmed cases driven by a new, more contagious variant. Olje Wapara has more. And a warning, some visuals may be found disturbing, so viewer discretion is advised.
The emergency committee met and advised me that, in its view, the situation constitutes a public health emergency of international concern.
Mpox was discovered in Denmark in 1958 in monkeys kept for research, and the first reported human case of Mpox was a 9-month-old boy in the Democratic Republic of Congo in 1970. Mpox is a viral illness caused by the monkeypox virus and can be transmitted to humans through physical contact with contaminated materials, infected animals, and the new variant through sexual transmission.
Higher in endemic areas, and especially in infants and young children, and lower in the eastern part of the country at the moment, where spread is more rapid through sexual transmission.
There have been more than 14,000 cases and 524 people have died from the disease. Cases are up 160% and deaths are up 19% compared with the same period last year in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
We have a large number of cases. The cases are increasing. The mortality rate is higher than we would tolerate. And then the thought is that new countries are now starting to report cases. So these are countries that didn't have cases in the last few years and now reporting cases. And several of them are reporting cases of the variant of Mpox that is being spread in the DRC.
Now, Africa and the world will need to brace up to combat the spread before it becomes a pandemic.
In this case, as it did for COVID and in other diseases, come together to make sure that we're doing surveillance together, we're supporting communities together, we're providing good clinical care, that there's access to countermeasures, that the research and development agenda is advanced, that there's political commitment, that there's coordination, and finally, and probably at this point, crucially, that there is financial commitment to stop this virus.
So I just want to get across the urgency that we're trying to say that the action is now, the time is now for us to take much more measures and provide much more support to the African region, to the countries that are affected across the entire spectrum.
There are currently 2 vaccines in use against the disease, both of which have been recommended by the WHO.
There are 2 vaccines for Mpox that have been approved by WHO-listed national regulatory authorities and which are recommended by WHO Strategic Advisory Group of Experts on Immunization, or SAGE. I have triggered the process for emergency use listing of both vaccines, which will accelerate vaccine access, particularly for lower-income countries. Emergency use listing also enables partners, including Gavi and UNICEF, to procure vaccines for distribution.
Experts advise a travel restriction on affected countries to fight further spread.
We live in an interconnected world, and these pathogens do not respect borders.
Olije Wapara, Arise News.
I think something that she said that's very profound with these new diseases and the spread that we are seeing is that we are living in an interconnected world. That's why we have Mpox in the DRC, in Sweden, in Nigeria, and over a dozen African countries at this point in time. It's not the level of a pandemic, thankfully. It's mostly mild, although it does not look pleasing to see the lesions. And hopefully this is something that will be dealt with the proper care in Nigeria, and also people just need to make sure they protect themselves, I think. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely, you're right. And of course, thankfully, we have Professor Tomori coming onto the program to speak to us about it. He's the expert. But I like the fact that the Nigerian Center for Disease Control has been very proactive. Dr. Jide Idris, who was commissioner in Lagos for about a decade or thereabout, has been up and doing, not only has been giving necessary information as far as Mpox is concerned, but also to remind people of where we are as far as the cholera outbreak, is which has killed by far more people. 39 cases in Nigeria is of concern, just like WHO has said. But I like the fact that everybody that is that in the authorities, within the authorities, are up and doing, giving information. And I like the fact that they are even saying that if push comes to shove, maybe there will have to be some travel advisories, particularly from a few of the countries in Central Africa, Eastern Africa, where this is a lot more endemic. We will, of course, get to hear from Professor Tomori and the politics around vaccines, and the rush, to release 2 different vaccines for emergency use, like they did during COVID, and how African countries that are, need it the most are being shielded from getting it. But of course, we're used to this kind of a thing, and I hope, of course, that Africa, as always, will survive.
Definitely. I mean, you've touched on it all. 39 cases, 5 in Bayelsa, 5 in Cross River, 4 in Ogun, 4 in Lagos, 3 in Ondo, and 3 in Ebonyi. And what we're really seeing, of course, because of the way Mpox actually is transmitted from animals to humans, it can spread through close contact, sexual contact, skin-to-skin interaction. This red alert that has been issued by the NCDC, of course, is focused on, heavy transit areas, heavy population areas. And as we continue to...
social contact part is the newest part of it.
It is quite interesting because I can't imagine that you would, want to engage in such activities with someone who is clearly showing symptoms of Mpox.
So if you have mild symptoms, you can have maybe only 5 lesions. So it might not be as... It's not like chickenpox where it would show all over the body. Obviously, we are seeing the most severe images online, but it might not present that way in every single individual, which means that you have to be much more careful.
Came up with a theory, isn't it? I think a professor of virology somewhere in the Niger Delta in Nigeria, talking about how it could be sexually transmitted. So I think that rings, closer home so that people can
what I would just say to, Nigerians and of course our audience watching this is if you begin to feel any symptoms whatsoever, it's important to just go into your medical facilities. Don't panic. It's something that can be treated. Vaccines are available, maybe not as much as in circulation as we want, but not to panic and just to continue to monitor. And like you said, the travel advisory is very important. I think I was just reading the first case that happened in Europe, even though scientists had said that it might not, it wouldn't spread as fast, but now we're seeing the first case in Sweden and even one in Pakistan as of this morning. So it's very important to continue to monitor that. But moving on now to our next story, Nigeria's presidency on Thursday responded to reports that a Chinese company, Zhongshan Fucheng Industrial Investment Co. Limited, had made several attempts to take over offshore assets of the federal government of Nigeria, describing the development as an act of subterfuge. Now, part of the alleged plan was the reported seizure of 3 aircrafts in the Nigerian presidential fleet. According to a statement issued and signed by Bayo Ononuga, Special Advisor to the President Bola Tinubu on Information and Strategy, the federal government is not under any contractual obligation with the company. The case in which Zhongshan is trying to use every unorthodox means to strip our offshore assets is between the company and the Ogun State government. The statement goes on to say that the federal government is fully aware of efforts being made by the Ogun State government to reach an amicable resolution on the matter. Wow. I mean, this story has dominated the headlines in the past couple of weeks. And what really stands out for me, 3 things, right? First off, why did it take so long? This is a case that has been on since 2016. You would expect that when we look at the several jurisdictions that this Chinese company has actually gone through to ensure that this judgment is actually passed. We've gone to the US, to the UK, and there's one more country that they had been to just to make sure that this in itself is passed. And you see now in 2024, we're now seeing this same body language that we always get from the federal government, where we wait till the very last minute and then we now start to rush and jump and run helter-skelter trying to solve it. this statement that has been put out by Bayo Ononuga really scares me, because if 3 different courts have been able to say that this about $75 million that is being awarded to this Chinese company actually they're deserving of it, then what really is the federal government saying? Were they not aware that this was sanctioned? Were they not aware that this case had been pending in court? What exactly, was the Attorney General doing? I'm talking Lateef Fagbemi. What was he doing, and why did it go so long? Secondly, the second thing that stands out for me as well is this continuity in government that seems to always have a breaker from administration to administration. It seems as if when one governor is done doing something, another governor comes in. There's no follow-up, there's no continuity. It's like you just come in and you just run with your own agenda. And finally, for me, it's a situation where we're now looking at our sovereign assets being seized. What exactly is the federal government doing to make sure that we don't have this kind of embarrassments? Even when we were off air, you said you had a swell time kind of just going through this arbitration. You are a lawyer. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this very embarrassing matter for the country.
I think first of all, this case is an arbitrated case, and the judgment was given years ago. The judgment says that Nigeria is liable. In that judgment, Nigeria signed a treaty with China in 2001, a bilateral treaty saying that they will protect Chinese interests in Nigeria in the way that China will protect Nigerian interests in China. They also said in that treaty that was signed in 2001, and it's very important to know that this was over 20 years ago, they also said that their dispute resolution would be through arbitration. Under that treaty, Ogun State then entered into an agreement with a private company. Under the treaty is cited in the agreement with Ogun State. Now, the federal government argued so the company comes, they get into an agreement with Ogun State, then they get into issues between 2015 and 2016, and Ogun State tells the company to withdraw. Not only does that, but uses the Nigerian Immigration Service to withhold passports, remove people's visas or their permits to work in the country. The Nigerian police force gets involved. And when the police force gets involved, they allegedly arrest one of the Chinese executives of the company, allegedly beat him, deprive him of food, and hold him for 10 days. These are all cited in the case. Now, when arms of the federal government, such as the police force, such as immigration, get involved in that case, they have made themselves a party to the case. Nigeria entered the arbitration, and I did spend yesterday going through the award that was granted against Nigeria. I was going through the case Nigeria had, and honestly, it's an embarrassment of a case as well. Nigeria made claims and did not call one expert witness. It shows that, honestly, we cannot argue our way away from incompetence. And I think it's unfair to call the current Attorney General right now, because truly this is something that he met there. The agreement had been, the arbitration award was already enforced before he ever was Attorney General.
Situation where he's coming into office, it's up to him to be able to look back at all the pending arbitrations,
now,
right?
I think people don't understand what is going on is that it's a done case. The award was given, but Nigeria did not pay. Ogun State did not pay. And so the company has gone to different jurisdictions to say, they're owing me money, enforce this. Enforce this agreement that is binding, because Nigeria has signed a New York Convention in America. They've signed this arbitration convention in different jurisdictions. We cannot sign international treaties. We cannot bind ourselves by certain laws. And then when it comes time to pay, we'll say subterfuge. And that's what's going on. Now, the issue now is, okay, people are arguing that planes should be protected. There's complete sovereign immunity. I don't know that that's certainly the case. I was reading the English case yesterday also. The two properties in Liverpool were being rented out. There was proof that people were paying rent. However, Nigeria was saying this is supposed to be used for consular purposes. However, they were renting it out.
Dilapidated for a long time and
yes,
used for
yes, it wasn't, and people were paying rent there. So if you've commercialized the property, so when we're now asking that Nigeria owned two properties in Liverpool that were dilapidated and being rented out for £800 to one person or £500 to another, we have to consider that the rot is within the system. You know, this is 20 years in the making. Is 3 different administrations, even within Ogun State, that are involved in this. And so the people who are responsible for this need to be held responsible from the state level, but the federal government can no longer opt out.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, it's a fairly complicated issue. A lot of people, but I think what is unfair is to push the blame to the current president or the attorney general or even the federal government, in that manner. This is a case like this was said that Ogun State, as a national entity entered into willingly. It wasn't federal government that entered into. But of course, since 2001, it was federal government that entered into the bilateral, agreement with China. So we're talking of the administration of Ottobagbenga Daniel, who instituted this thing and wanted a kind of a free trade zone. Yeah. But of course, what happened between the time that Ottobagbenga Daniel's administration had that deal and the time that Senator Amusun got there and saw nothing other than just a fence, and then reviewed. Sorry, you were going to say?
No, because that fence statement that was held in in the presidency statement is also something. The presidency statement, for me, the presidency statement should have made it clear that this is a 20-year case. Rather than make it clear there was a 20-year case, they put forward falsehood, saying that the case had failed in the UK and US, and saying that the fence argument is not. This is the first time that it's being claimed in any legal argument that I've seen by the Nigerian government.
Exactly what I'm referencing is actually from the statement that Ogun State itself, put out. But my point is not to debate the case here, but also to give our governments, both the federal and Ogun State, the leeway to argue their cases. We have lost at the level of awards being awarded. First, I think it was $55 million, and then other charges and everything. Yes, that's what it looks like. But of course, that doesn't mean that the federal government or Ogun State government should keep quiet and just, because we do not have the full details of what the government of Amusun, saw. What will be wrong and unprofessional will be that didn't we study the terms of agreement, particularly, the bilateral, before cancelling and then, getting into a situation where the cases of human rights abuse and things like that will be there. I wouldn't want to, condemn what the two governments did. And I see from the tone of the current administration that they seem to align with the reasons adduced by Amusun's government why that thing had to be discontinued. How it will be discontinued, is now the case, which is why the federal government is also saying that we insist that we're not, at fault.
Yeah, but
however,
but if they had reasons, just like Adesua rightfully mentioned, if they had reasons to cancel that contract, that was the bone of contention that had to be proven in a court of law.
They're proving it.
They're
proving it, but they're losing.
No. I'm just saying that in terms of, for example, the fence defense, this is not something that was raised in Nigeria with arbitration, and that's why I'm saying that we need to be very, because statements made in media, even by the Chinese, might not relay the facts that they claim in court, and statements made in media by Nigerians might not relay the facts that they.
It won't even be. It won't even be what
what is it? Yes,
exactly.
And for me, this shows why we need to be intentional about every level, especially when it comes to law, especially when it comes to our international dealings. The case here is foreign direct investment.
Definitely.
The case here is that we've had this with PNID, we've had this with
that
Malabu.
Came out to be a scam.
But even with PNID,
which is my point, that because we have lost at a certain level now against the Chinese, does not mean that we were totally wrong.
However, even with the PNID judgment, and I think we look at it as though it is some moral triumph. It is not. The reason why the judgment was thrown out is because there was fault on both sides. The final judgment still said that our Attorney General, Malami, essentially was not completely honest with the court. So this is not something, it's not a moral victory for Nigeria.
Right.
PNID we were lucky that they were just as bad as we were.
The point really is that lessons, must be learned, and that we have to be a lot more tidy, especially when it comes to direct.
If we talk about lessons learned, is it safe to say that going forward, and maybe I take it back by not fully laying the blame, at the feet of the Attorney General, but maybe going forward, any, foreign deals that are gone into, any international deals that are going to need to be sanctioned by the Attorney General's office, and before it's even cancelled.
No, I don't think that's it. He won't have time to do any other thing if he has to deal with it. There are Attorney Generals who are qualified.
Yes,
you know,
yes.
as the Federal Attorney General in each of the states. And they
Yes.
do, the processes of going through, you know, such deals are not, they're not bread and tea, you know.
By the time
But
they
when
seize
things
all our
happen,
jets,
yeah, I mean,
we'll have to find a way to
let us
figure it
be
out.
too hard on our government because there's something that does not look right. I think that they can get it right, and even if they don't, lessons will have been learned so that we don't have to repeat it again. But I think we have to move on, and then we go to Nigeria's headline inflation rate has decreased to 33.40% in July of 2024 this year, down from 34.19% in June 2024. This marks the first decline in the headline inflation rate since December 2022, when it last dropped to 21.33%. The latest inflation rate figures are based on the National Bureau of Statistics (CPI) reports for July 2024. According to the report, the headline inflation rate decreased by 0.79 percentage points in July 2024 compared to June of the same year. On a year-on-year basis, the rate was 9.32 percentage points higher than in July 2023, when it stood at 24.08%. This indicates an increase in the headline inflation rate on a year-on-year basis for July 2024. Additionally, on a month-on-month basis, the headline inflation rate in July 2024 was 2.28%, slightly lower than the 31% recorded in June 2024. Food and non-alcoholic beverages contributed 17.30% to the year-on-year inflation, followed by housing, water, electricity, gas, and other fuel at 5.59% and others. Quite a mouthful there, isn't it?
Yes,
All the percentage points year-on-year, and at the end of the day, a bit of good news, less than 1%, you know, from what we had in June now to what we had in July. But, you know, but I've been following this, you know, people's reaction to this. You know, obviously, a bit of good news, but people are like, so what
Exactly.
what does this
feels like
mean
there's still a
to my
disconnect.
pocket? Yeah, but I also think that maybe we shouldn't, again, be too dismissive of it. I'm reading about, and of course that you ladies will probably know much more better. I'm reading about baskets of tomatoes, you know, coming down from exactly tubers of yam and things like that. But at the same time, we're now dealing with another horrific, you know, fuel crisis all over the country. We do not even know how much is the official figure. Is it 65? It is no sorry, 650. It is no longer anything close to 800 anymore. Even in Lagos, we're dealing with between 800, 850 to 1,000 and more. Some other people will say 1,300. So when we're claiming to be recording some modicum of progress in some areas, people are saying, let's look at it in totality. How's the economy performing? How are people's pockets responding, you know, to the economy? Not yet, not even anything close to let's celebrate. But again, we must acknowledge that maybe certain things are beginning to work, you know, on a gradual basis, and that people shouldn't totally lose hope. I think that's what it's all about. But all the percentage points and all those things, I'm not so sure.
It can be a bit
it probably confuses you more.
Well, I mean, the only thing I'm going to just touch on is the fact that analysts had said in June that, you know, that the highest that we saw in June could actually be the peak in inflation as currency devaluation starts to come down. And we've spoken about this, you know, this July slowdown. We're seeing the effects, fufu, gari, tomato, all of these things coming down. Yes, I know, I went to the market yesterday. But really, honestly, it doesn't feel that different. And that's why I'm looking at all of these figures and I'm saying it's not really relating, or that's not really what we're seeing on ground. But there's also that aspect. You know, I was having this conversation with someone yesterday where even we as Nigerians, we have that tendency to never want to bring the price of something down once it goes up, knowing fully well that, okay, a bag of rice is supposed to be selling for 70K. It's come down to maybe about 65, 64, but you still have people in the market that will insist on selling it for that amount. So how does that balance out? Adesola?
I would say, like, the reason why that happens beyond personal greed is because of uncertainty. because people don't know if they'll wake up tomorrow and dollar will be 2,000 or they'll wake up and it'll be 1,200. Part of the issue with the foreign exchange markets was the volatilities. Because of uncertainty, people cannot predict if I sell.
Why is it in Nigeria that the volatility
is so extreme?
I don't get it. I mean, if you're in Ghana and you are in Cotonou, I mean, all the CFA.
You'll be there for 1 week and it won't change. It won't change so badly.
What is it that is making our own?
But I think
where are the demons coming from that are always attacking our own naira?
Most of our inflation is based off of food inflation, and that's why we're talking about food inflation. Even our inflation numbers have gone down. But the very important thing to stress is that the reduction in inflation just means that prices are increasing slower, but they're still increasing. And I think that's something we need to keep in view. You know, I always say, I sing Cardi B's praises here all the time, but I always say that the CBN, with what they were doing with the NPR.
Cardi B's praises anywhere.
No, I'm only, however, what I was saying is,
cash in the banks.
Because the month-to-month inflation was slowing down, it was clear that at some point in time, the inflation numbers would drop. It's something significant to say that with the demons we're fighting for the first time in 19 months, we're seeing a drop. A small drop, but nonetheless, it's trending in the right direction.
Exactly.
Now it's to make sure that all the other things, the coordinating minister of the economy, for example, or the removing tariffs on foods, that all these things work in conjunction to further decrease inflation, so that the Central Bank of Nigeria can then look back at the MPR, then look back at the rates that we are putting out and say, let's reduce this so that businesses have it easier, because they're fighting inflation to try and put out a fire, but at the same time, we're not really growing. I think the agriculture sector grew less than 2%. Manufacturing sector less than 1%. The rate of growth is really, really small.
We're not growing, and that's the reality. But in cheerleading Cardi B and his reforms and everything, is it possible to just ram it home that we're still buying naira?
At the banks,
You can get naira at the ATMs, but then you go to the POSs, people are buying on a daily basis. The fellow who called himself Bobrisky went to prison and back. Nothing has changed substantially at the parties. 50,000, you pay extra 10,000 or 12,000. These were the issues that we thought that it was a Mephieli issues, but then 15 months into Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu's and almost a year of Cardi B there, this is what we're still dealing with. So
naira should not be a commodity. Absolutely.
Viewers, just in case you're wondering who Cardi B is, we're talking about Bakale Kurdos.
Not the rapper.
From your mouth. All right. Former U.S. President Donald Trump recently showcased everyday grocery items like instant coffee and sugary cereals while discussing rising costs for essentials such as food, car insurance, and housing. His remarks came after President Joe Biden's unexpected exit from the re-election race and endorsement of Kamala Harris. Trump defended his campaign style against critics, asserting he is more composed than his fiery rhetoric might suggest, and expressed openness to having Nikki Haley join his campaign trail in the event that she chose to support him ahead of November's election. Nikki Haley, the former South Carolina governor and Trump's last GOP rival, ended her campaign following Trump's Super Tuesday victories. Although she initially refrained from endorsing Trump, she has since voiced her support and spoken at the Republican National Convention.
I just want to win for the country. Some people say, oh, why don't you be nice? But they're not nice to me. They want to put me in prison, just so you understand. They tell me I should be nice. They want to put me in prison. It's never happened before in the history of our country. I did nothing wrong.
And would you consider having Nikki Haley on the campaign trail with you?
Sure. I think that we've done very well. I think that we're hitting a nerve. I think this is a different kind of a race. All we have to do is define our opponent as being a communist or a socialist or somebody that's going to destroy our country. I think I'm doing a very calm campaign. I mean, we're here. There's no shouting. Now, you'll say he ranted and raved, and not you. But some of you will say, he ranted and raved. I didn't rant and rave. I'm a very calm person, believe it or not. If I wasn't, probably wouldn't be around anymore, Probably wouldn't be around. But no, I think I appreciate her advice. I have to do it my way. I ran against her, and I did it my way. People said I should maybe do it a different way. But do I regret debating Biden? So it was his request. He said we should get the debates on early. And I was willing. Don't forget, I got CNN, I got Jake Tapper and Dana Bash, they're not Trump people. They wanted to have a debate where their mics are turned off when the other person's answering the question. They gave me every single thing that I couldn't approve, and I said, yeah, I'll do it. So they got the debate on their term. About whether or not the debate should have happened would have been a better question to ask of Joe Biden, because had he not done the debate, he would still be running for president and people would be hiding him.
All right, that's Donald J. Trump for you there. You will have to contend with him till November the 5th. When the election, at least till November the 15th. But you know, we don't know what will happen by November. We see that Kamala is rising very high and has, you know, gained all the lost grounds that, you know, Joe Biden, you know, will have. I mean, it was like a game over, you know, when Joe Biden was there. But now, the interesting thing for me was that the pressure on Joe Biden to drop out came after the first debate. Now we're going to have about 2 or 3. And next month, will there be yet another casualty after the debate? I think that it will be interesting to listen to the two of them address issues and not, you know, engage in rhetorics and personal attacks. I guess that for 90% of those who will be voting, their choices are already made. It will be the independents and a few people, you know, in the swing states that will determine the thing. But again, like I said, we'll have to listen to Mr. Trump till November the 5th, at least. But then we'll see what happens.
I mean, when just talking about like the personal attacks, Trump, he's not really going out of character. But one thing that, you know, his tactic top allies have cautioned him against doing of course, are these personal attacks. But the focus really should be on his policies. And at this point, like you said, a lot of people already know who they're going to be voting for. It's really just about seeing what's. I'm really looking forward to that debate, honestly. It's going to be probably one of the top TV moments coming out of this year, and I really cannot wait to see that debate between Harris and Trump.
You know, I'm also looking for the vice presidential debates between J.D. Vance and Tim Walz. I think that is something to look forward to. I'm a bit nervous. I'm not sure how Walz will hold up, but he is a vet and he's a coach. They call him Coach Tim. I think one thing that is very important that you just said is that policies. We're not talking a lot about policies in this election, especially at this stage of the election. It's only really started in the past week. We're talking about inflation with the Medicare health bills that Joe Biden just passed, helping make medicine more affordable for older Americans. But as you said, there are still significant numbers of undecided voters. Harris has risen in the polls. However, her numbers now are not even as good as Hillary Clinton's was at this time in their own election.
Absolutely.
And so we have to remember that Hillary Clinton won the popular vote but still lost the election. Harris needs way more votes than Trump in order to win because of the states that she will need to carry.
And I think she ranked higher even up till the elections, Hillary against Trump, you know, on election day at the polls.
Polling
you just have to be careful.
You have to be careful. But
you know.
I think she's been able to maintain quite a lot of the momentum that she started with, and it's definitely very impressive.
She's done very well, you know. A lot of it, you know, some people will say that it's still Kamala Harris. What do they call it? No. What that thing you have after a marriage?
The honeymoon.
But for how many weeks we will see how it is. So you know, some folk were saying like, will it not be too soon to have, you know, another black person in the White House? I said nothing is too soon. You know,
just make sure you
qualify.
have your.
If she can deliver, why not?
Definitely qualify. Make sure you have your bingo card with weird on there, because that's one word that Tim Walz uses.
Right. Well, that will do it on the week that was, but let's take a minute or two to bring you up to date with a couple of stories making the rounds. And we'll start in India, where doctors across India are on strike protesting the rape and murder of a female colleague in Kolkata. The Indian Medical Association, which represents doctors nationwide has shut down all non-essential hospital services. The association described the killing as a crime of barbaric scale and says it highlights the lack of safe spaces for women in the country. Protests are growing, especially after a mob vandalized the hospital where the attack occurred.
Meanwhile, ceasefire talks in Doha, the Qatari capital, regarding the conflict in Gaza were put on hold on Friday, with negotiators set to reconvene next week. In a joint statement, the US, Qatar and Egypt announced that the American government had put forward a new proposal which seeks to build on agreements made over the past week and aims to close gaps between the two sides, making it easier to implement a deal quickly. The latest discussions are part of ongoing talks that have been happening for months to end the war in Gaza, which has resulted in the deaths of tens of thousands.
All right, and here in Nigeria, gunmen have kidnapped 20 medical and dental students, as well as a house officer in the north-central state of Benue. The students, who were said to be from universities in Jos and Maiduguri, were traveling to Enugu for an annual medical convention. The Benue State Police Command says it has commenced investigation. It's the latest kidnapping on the Otukpo Federal Highway in recent months. 6 weeks ago, the management team of a polytechnic, as well as some Catholic priests, were abducted on that same road, making it one of Nigeria's most dangerous highways at the moment.